In the twilight halls of Rivendell, where starlight dances through ancient windows and the echoes of ages whisper through marble corridors, a conversation took place that would shape the destiny of Middle-earth itself. Picture, if you will, the Lord of Rivendell, Elrond Half-elven, Master of Wisdom, Keeper of Vilya, Herald of Gil-galad, standing before his daughter, Arwen Undomiel, the even-star of her people. Her eyes hold the light of Eärendil, her beauty rivals that of Lúthien herself, and her heart belongs to a ranger of the north. But when love's petition reached his ears, when Arwen spoke of her desire to wed Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elrond's response was not blessing, but refusal, not joy, but sorrow, not celebration, but a silence so profound it seemed to dim the very light of Rivendell itself. Why would the wisest of the wise refuse such a union? Why would he, who had counseled kings and fought beside heroes, deny his beloved daughter the desires of her heart? The answer, dear listeners, lies not in cruelty, but in a love so deep, a foresight so terrible, and a burden so ancient that it had been carried for 3,000 years of Middle-earth's history. Tonight, we delve into one of Tolkien's most profound explorations of sacrifice, destiny, and the price of love. For this is not merely a tale of an overprotective father. This is the story of a being who has witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, who has seen the price of love between the immortal and the mortal, and who carries within his memory the weight of every tragedy that such unions have wrought. But to understand Elrond's refusal, we must first understand Elrond himself and the burden of memory that no mortal mind could bear. The rain fell upon the ruins of Gil-galad's camp, each drop carrying with it the ashes of the Second Age's end. There, among the fallen, stood Elrond Peredhel Half-elven, they called him, though that name carried more sorrow than honor. He had just witnessed the death of his king, his lord, his friend. Gil-galad, the High King, lay still beneath the shadow of Mount Doom, and with him died something precious in the world. Hope, perhaps, or innocence. But this was not Elrond's first taste of loss. Oh no, dear listeners, for when you have lived for thousands of years, when the blood of both elves and men flows through your veins, loss becomes as familiar as breathing. Consider his childhood, if childhood it can be called when it was spent fleeing the kinslaying at the havens of Sirion. Picture a young Elrond, barely more than a child, watching as elf slew elf for the cursed Silmarils, the sons of Feanor, driven by oath and madness, bringing fire and sword to his home. Maedhros and Maglor found him there, this half-elven child, and in a moment of grace that perhaps surprised even them, they chose love over vengeance. They raised him as their own, these kinslayers, these oath-bound princes. From them, Elrond learned his first lesson about the price of unbreakable vows, about the way love and duty can twist into shapes that destroy everything they meant to protect. Years passed, decades, centuries. Elrond watched his brother Elros make the choice that all half-elven must face. Mortality or immortality, the fate of men or the doom of elves. Elros chose the path of kings, became the first king of Númenor, and in choosing mortality, chose also to be sundered from his brother forever. Another lesson learned: love means loss, and choice means sacrifice. Through the long years that followed, Elrond served Gil-galad faithfully. He stood witness to the glory of Númenor and its terrible fall. He saw Sauron's corruption spread like poison through the hearts of men. He watched kingdoms rise in splendor and collapse in ruin. Each victory was Tempi, Orari. Each peace was fragile, and behind it all, the shadow grew longer. And now, in the Third Age, as Rivendell's master and guardian of one of the three rings, Elrond had become something unique in Middle-earth. A being who remembered everything, who had seen every pattern repeat, who could trace the threads of fate across millennia. His wisdom was not learned from books alone, but carved into his very soul by the chisel of endless loss. So when he looked upon his daughter Arwen, when he saw in her eyes the same light that had shone in Lúthien's gaze, when he heard her speak of love for a mortal man, what did he see? Not romance, dear listeners, not the sweet beginning of a fairy tale. He saw the end of the story, the inevitable, heartbreaking, soul-destroying end that he had witnessed too many times before. But there was another thread in this tapestry, another story that haunted Elrond's dreams and made his refusal not just wise, but necessary. Deep in the archives of Rivendell, in chambers where even the dust holds memories, there lies a song older than kingdoms. It tells of Lúthien to Núviel, the most beautiful of all the children of Ilúvatar, and Beren the mortal, who dared to love her. Their tale is legend, how love conquered death itself, how the Silmaril was won from Morgoth's crown, how even the Valar were moved to pity by their devotion. But Elrond knew what the songs often forgot to mention, the price that was paid, and the price that would be paid again and again by their descendants. Picture Lúthien in the halls of Mandos, pleading for her beloved's life. See her there, radiant even in the presence of death itself, willing to sacrifice her immortality for one mortal love. The Valar, moved by such devotion, granted her wish, but at what cost? Lúthien chose mortality, yes, but she also chose to bind her line forever to the tragedy of such choices. From their union came Dior, who inherited both the blessing and the curse of his parents' love. The Silmaril that Beren had won became the doom of Dior's house, bringing the sons of Feanor to his door with sword and fire. Dior died, his sons vanished, his daughter Elwing fled, with the jewel across the sea. Even love triumphant over death could not protect its children from the consequences of that triumph. And Elwing, here the tale becomes even more personal for Elrond. For Elwing, bearer of Lúthien's light and Beren's courage, wed Eärendil the mariner. From their union came twin sons, Elros and Elrond themselves. The blood of Lúthien and Beren flowed in Elrond's veins, making him heir not just to their glory, but to their doom. Every time Elrond looked upon Arwen, he saw Lúthien returned. Tolkien himself wrote that she was so like was she to Lúthien, that it seemed she had returned from the dead. But to Elrond, this resemblance was not cause for joy. It was a warning written in starlight, a prophecy of sorrow yet to come. For if Arwen was Lúthien returned, then her love for Aragorn was the same story beginning anew. The same choice between immortality and love, the same willingness to sacrifice eternity for a few mortal years of happiness. But Elrond had lived through the consequences of that choice. He had seen how the descendants of such unions carried both the blessing of great love and the curse of inevitable loss. Standing in his halls, watching Arwen's eyes shine with the same light that had once moved the Valar themselves, Elrond felt the weight of prophecy settling upon his shoulders like a funeral shroud. History was not just repeating, it was demanding another sacrifice, another sundering, another price to be paid in tears and ash. But this time, the one who would pay that price was his daughter, his beloved Evenstar, the light of his immortal life. Could he stand by and watch her make the same choice that had brought such woe, tie and such sorrow into the world? Could he bless a union that he knew, with the terrible certainty of foresight, would end in grief? The answer lay not in the past alone, but in the uncertain future of a ranger who had not yet claimed his throne. In the wild lands beyond Rivendell's borders, a shadow walked among shadows. The rangers called him Strider, though his true name was known to few. Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, rightful king of Gondor, and Arnor, titles that rang hollow in the wilderness, crowns that existed only in memory and prophecy. For what was an heir without a kingdom? What was a king without a throne? Elrond had watched this young man grow from a child brought to Rivendell's safety to a ranger riding the dark paths of the north. He had trained Aragorn in the arts of war and wisdom, had seen his courage tested in battle after battle against the servants of the Dark Lord. But courage alone could not restore a kingdom that had lain in ruins for centuries. Consider the magnitude of what Elrond demanded. Not merely that Aragorn prove himself worthy of Arwen's love, but that he achieve what no man had accomplished in over 1,000 years. The kingdoms of Arnor were broken, scattered, their people wandering as rangers in the wild. Gondor, though still standing, was ruled by stewards who had long ago given up hope that their kings would return. The bloodline of Isildur was remembered more as a curse than a blessing, for had not Isildur himself failed at the moment of ultimate victory, allowing the ring to endure? But Elrond's condition was more than political calculation. Listen to his words, recorded in the annals of that house. "I will not give my daughter to any man unless he be king of both Gondor and Arnor. Not duke, not lord, not even prince, king." The full restoration of Isildur's realm, the healing of the breach between the northern and southern kingdoms, the return of the Age of Kings to a world that had forgotten how to hope for such things. To mortal ears, this might have sounded like an impossible demand, the cruel requirement of a father who sought any excuse to deny his daughter's happiness. But remember, Elrond had the gift of foresight. He could see the threads of possibility stretching into the future, could glimpse the paths that might unfold from each choice made in the present. And in those visions, what did he see? A darkness rising in the east, a shadow that would soon stretch across all of Middle-earth, the ring of power stirring from its long sleep, the Dark Lord returning to his full strength, armies marching that would make the wars of old seem like children's games. In such times, love alone would not be enough to protect those dear to him. Only a king might stand against such darkness. Only the restoration of the ancient alliance between elves and men might preserve the light in the world. But there was something else in Elrond's foresight, something that perhaps even he did not fully understand at first. For Aragorn's path to the throne was not separate from Arwen's fate. They were intertwined, each necessary for the other. Without the hope of Arwen's love, would Aragorn have found the strength to claim his heritage? Without the promise of becoming worthy of the Evenstar, would the Ranger have ever become the king? Yet this knowledge brought no comfort to Elrond's heart, for he could also see what lay beyond the victory, beyond the crown, beyond the golden years of Aragorn's reign. He could see Arwen in her final days, alone beneath the Melian of Lothlorien, fading as all mortal things must fade, carrying within her heart the wound that no time could heal, the loss of immortality, freely chosen for love. The trap was perfect in its cruelty. To win Aragorn's kingship might save Middle-earth itself, but it would doom Arwen to a mortal life and a mortal death. To refuse would preserve his daughter's immortality, but might leave the world defenseless against the coming darkness. Standing between these futures, Elrond made his choice, not the easy path of blessing or refusal, but the narrow way between them. A condition that might save the world and spare his daughter, if only fate proved kinder than foresight suggested. But fate, as Elrond well knew, rarely showed such kindness to the children of Lúthien. There is a burden that few in Middle-earth could comprehend, the burden of being caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither, carrying the gifts and curses of both. This was the doom of the Half-elven, the price of standing at the crossroads between mortality and immortality. And it was this burden that Elrond saw settling upon his daughter's shoulders like a mantle woven of starlight and shadow. For Arwen, like her father before her, faced the choice that all of Arundel's line must make. But unlike Elrond, who chose between the immortal halls of his elven kindred and the mortal lands of his human heritage, Arwen's choice was more terrible still. She must choose not between two abstract fates, but between her love and her very nature. To understand the weight of this decision, we must delve into the metaphysics of Tolkien's world itself. The elves are bound to Arda until its ending, immortal not by grace or magic, but by the very nature of their creation. When their bodies die, their spirits journey to the halls of Mandos, where they may be re-embodied and return to the world. Death, for elves, is not ending, but passage. Men, by contrast, receive what Tolkien called the gift of Ilúvatar, mortality itself, the ability to pass beyond the circles of the world when death comes. Where the spirits of men go, not even the valor know fully. Some called it a gift, others a doom, but it was the nature given to them by Eru Ilúvatar at the world's beginning. But what of the half-elven? They alone among all the children of Ilúvatar were granted the power to choose their fate. Elros had chosen the path of men and became mortal, founding the line of the kings of Númenor. Elrond had chosen the way of the elves and became immortal, taking his place among the wise of Middle-earth. Now that same choice fell to Arwen, but with a difference that made Elrond's heart ache with foreknowledge. For her decision was bound up with love in a way that his had never been. To choose Aragorn was to choose mortality, not as an abstract philosophical decision, but as a living sacrifice made for another's sake. In his letters, Tolkien described Arwen's choice as the most poignant of all the tales of Middle-earth. For she was not merely choosing to become mortal, she was choosing to bind her fate to that of one man, to live only as long as her love for him sustained her, and then to fade when grief became too heavy to bear. Elrond, master of foresight, could see the shape of that grief even before it came to pass. He could see Arwen in her final days, walking alone among the golden trees of Lothlorien, carrying within her heart the echo of a love that had become both her salvation and her doom. She would lie down upon Ceren Amroth, the hill where she had first plighted her troth to Aragorn, and there she would speak her last words. Here is the heart of elvendom on earth, and here my heart dwells ever, unless there be a light beyond the dark roads that we still must tread, you and I. This was the future that Elrond's refusal sought to prevent. Not the political complications of a marriage between elf and man, not the practical difficulties of uniting the kingdoms, but the ultimate tragedy of watching his daughter choose a mortal death for the sake of a mortal love. Yet even as he spoke his refusal, even as he set his impossible conditions, Elrond must have known that he was fighting against the current of fate itself. For the blood of Lúthien ran strong in Arwen's veins, and love had always been the doom and glory of that line. Just as Lúthien had chosen Beren over immortality, just as she had pleaded with death itself for the sake of her beloved, so too would Arwen make her choice. Not because she was forced to, but because her very nature demanded it. The tragedy was not that Elrond failed to prevent his daughter's mortal choice, but that his love for her made him wish he could. But perhaps there was more to Elrond's refusal than even the fear of loss could explain. Perhaps, in the deep wisdom that comes only from witnessing the rise and fall of ages, he understood that some battles cannot be won by protecting those we love from their own choices, but only by ensuring that those choices lead to something worthy of the sacrifice they demand. The gift of foresight is both blessing and curse. It shows what may come to pass, but not always why it must be so. In the swirling mists of future possibility, Elrond could see glimpses of coming events, the Fellowship of the Ring, the War of the Ring, the return of the King. He could see that great deeds would be required, that heroes would need to rise, that the very fate of Middle-earth would hang upon the choices made by individuals who did not yet know their own importance. And in those visions, again and again, he saw two figures standing at the center of it all. Aragorn the king and Arwen the queen, their love not merely personal but symbolic, representing the renewed alliance between elves and men that would be necessary to heal Middle-earth's wounds. Consider the weight of this revelation. Elrond was not merely a father concerned for his daughter's happiness. He was a guardian of the future itself, charged with ensuring that the choices made in his time would lead to the salvation rather than the destruction of everything he held dear. His refusal was not cruel protection but wise preparation. By demanding that Aragorn prove himself worthy not just of Arwen's love but of the crown itself, Elrond was ensuring that when the time of testing came, the king would be ready. For what would have happened if Aragorn had claimed Arwen's hand while still just a ranger of the north? Would he have had the strength to leave her safety for the dark paths that led to Mordor? Would he have been willing to risk everything he held dear for the sake of a world that had forgotten his name? Love can inspire great deeds, but it can also bind us to the familiar, the safe, the small circles of our personal happiness. But a king who had won his queen through great deeds, who had proven his worth through trial and triumph, such a man might find in that very love the strength to risk everything for something greater than himself. The crown that Aragorn would wear was not just a symbol of political power, but a responsibility to all the peoples of Middle-earth. And Arwen, as his queen, would share that burden. This too Elrond could foresee, that his daughter's choice would make her not just the bride of a king, but the queen of the reunited realms, the living symbol of the renewed friendship between elves and men. Her sacrifice of immortality would be not just personal loss, but cosmic gain, proof that love could bridge even the fundamental divide between the children of Ilúvatar. Yet even this knowledge could not ease the ache in Elrond's heart when he contemplated the price his daughter would pay for the world's healing. For in the end, no matter how great the good that came from her choice, no matter how many lives were saved or how much beauty was preserved, Arwen and herself would still fade and die while he lived on, carrying the memory of her loss through all the long ages of the world. This was the final cruelty of foresight, to see both the necessity of loss and its inevitability, to understand both why it must happen and why it hurt beyond bearing. The moment came, as Elrond had always known it would, when prophecy demanded its fulfillment, and choice could no longer be delayed. The ring-bearer had accepted his burden, the fellowship had been chosen, and the War of the Ring had begun in earnest. In the halls of Rivendell, preparations were made for the great gamble that would determine the fate of all free peoples. But before the armies marched, before the final battle was joined, another drama played out in the quiet chambers, where a father faced the inevitable loss of his daughter's heart. Picture that scene, if you will. Elrond, master of wisdom and keeper of memory, standing before Arwen Ondomiel, the even star of her people. Between them hung the weight of unspoken knowledge. Both knew what choice she had made. Both understood what it would cost. The time for conditions and refusals had passed. Destiny would not be denied by paternal protection, however loving. And so, with the gravity that befitted such a moment, Elrond spoke the words that would release his daughter to her chosen fate. I give hope to the Dunedain. I have kept no hope for myself. In those words lay not bitter resignation, but the deepest expression of love possible. The willingness to let go, to trust that the heart knows truths that even wisdom cannot fully comprehend. For Aragorn had done what many thought impossible. Through long years of trial and testing, through battles fought in shadow and deeds performed far from any witness, He had proven himself worthy, not just of a crown, but of the sacrifice Arwen offered. He had become, in truth, the king that Middle-earth needed, not through birthright alone, but through choice, through growth, through the long alchemy that transforms rangers into rulers. The wedding that followed was more than the union of two hearts, though it was certainly that. It was the healing of ancient wounds, the restoration of broken alliances, the promise that the fourth age would be brighter than the third. Elrond, performing the ceremony that bound his daughter to mortality, spoke words of blessing even as his heart broke with the beauty and terror of what was unfolding. For a time, all too brief in the measure of immortal lives, gloriously long in the span of human joy, love triumphed. Aragorn and Arwen ruled from the throne of Gondor, their reign marked by peace, prosperity, and the flowering of arts and learning. Children were born to them, carrying forward the mingled bloodlines of Númenor and Rivendell. The kingdoms were reunited. The alliance between elves and men was renewed, and for a few golden decades, it seemed that love had indeed conquered all. But Elrond's gift of foresight extended beyond the wedding bells and coronation fanfares to the quiet conclusion that awaited every mortal tale. He had seen it in vision long before it came to pass, the day when age would finally claim the king, when Aragorn's strength would fail and his long life would reach its appointed end. On that day, as foretold, Arwen would face the final consequence of her choice. No longer sustained by the presence of her beloved, no longer able to find joy in a world that had lost its king, she would begin the slow fading that marks the end of all things mortal. She would journey north to Lothlorien, to the hill where she had first pledged her love, and there she would lie down beneath the golden trees and let her mortal life slip away like autumn leaves upon the wind. This was the sorrow that Elrond's refusal had sought to prevent, the grief that his conditions had been designed to forestall. Not cruelty, but love. Love so deep that it would rather risk its own happiness than witness the beloved's pain. Yet in the end, even the deepest love cannot protect another from the consequences of their own choices, nor should it try. For in choosing mortality for the sake of love, Arwen had chosen something more precious than immortality itself. She had chosen to make her life mean something, to bind her fate to another's in a way that gave both their lives greater significance. Her loss would be real, terrible, and final. But her love would be equally real, equally powerful, and equally eternal in the memory of those who witnessed its beauty. In the end, as the ships prepared to carry Elrond across the sea to the undying lands, as he made ready for the final parting from his daughter, what thoughts occupied the mind of the Master of Rivendell? What comfort could there be for an immortal heart preparing to carry the wound of loss through all the ages of the world? Perhaps he found solace in the knowledge that some choices, however painful their consequences, are still the right choices to make. Arwen's decision to wed Aragorn and accept mortality was not a mistake to be corrected or a tragedy to be prevented. It was the fulfillment of her nature, the expression of her truest self, the way in which the blood of Lúthien finally found its perfect flowering. For in the end, that was what Elrond's refusal had truly been about, not preventing his daughter from making her choice, but ensuring that when she made it, it would be for reasons worthy of the sacrifice it entailed. His conditions had not been cruel barriers, but tests designed to prove that the love Arwen offered would be met with love equally deep, equally sacrificial, equally true. Aragorn had passed those tests magnificently. He had claimed not just a throne, but the responsibility that came with it. He had proven himself capable of love that was both personal and universal, both intimate and noble. In winning Arwen's hand, he had won the right to share her burden, to make her sacrifice meaningful through his own dedication to the greater good. And perhaps, in his deepest wisdom, Elrond understood something that even his foresight could not fully reveal. That some loves are greater than the lives that contain them, that some choices echo through eternity even when they lead to mortal endings. Lúthien and Beren's love had not died with them, but had flowed down through the generations, inspiring new choices, new sacrifices, new triumphs over despair. So too would Arwen and Aragorn's love endure beyond their mortal lives. In their children, in the kingdom they had healed, in the alliance they had restored, in the memory of their reign that would inspire future generations to believe that love and courage could indeed triumph over darkness. In all of these ways, their love would prove as immortal as any elven life. Standing on the shores of the Grey Havens, preparing for the journey that would take him forever from Middle-earth, Elrond could finally see the full pattern of which his refusal had been merely one thread. He had not been cruel to demand conditions of Aragorn. He had been wise to ensure that when love demanded its sacrifice, that sacrifice would serve purposes greater than itself. His daughter would die, yes, as all mortal things must die. But she would die having lived, having chosen, having made her brief span of years burn with a light that would never be forgotten. And in that light, reflected in the faces of her children and the eyes of those whose lives were touched by her grace, something immortal would endure after all. The ships sailed west, carrying Elrond toward the peace of the undying lands. Behind him, Middle-earth entered its fourth age, the age of men, shaped in part by the love he had once refused to bless. Time would prove the wisdom of his refusal, just as it would prove the greater wisdom of his final acceptance. For sometimes the deepest love expresses itself not in saying yes, but in making others worthy of yes. Sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give is not protection from choice, but preparation for the consequences of choice. And sometimes, in the fullness of time and the completion of all tales, even the most painful partings prove to have been necessary steps in a dance too vast and beautiful for any single heart to comprehend. In the end, Elrond's refusal was not the barrier to love, but love's own deepest expression. The willingness to demand that love prove itself worthy of the sacrifices it asks others to make. And in the golden years of Aragorn and Arwen's reign, in the peace that followed war and the hope that followed despair, that love proved itself worthy indeed. The even star had set at last, but its light would shine forever in the memory of Middle-earth and in the heart of the half-elven lord who had loved her enough to let her go. So this story ends, but many await. Subscribe so no tale escapes you.